Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Now we've all heard of that there. All right, make yourself comfortable. We've all heard of the unsinkable Margaret Brown, aka the unsinkable Molly Brown. And if you don't know who Margaret Brown is, she was an American socialite who survived the sinking of the RMS Titanic and demanded a lifeboat go back and find survivors after the Titanic fully sank. She is brilliantly portrayed by Kathy Bates in the movie Titanic. Now, I'm not dissing her at all. Huge perks for that girl. Huge perks. But the name Unsinkable really belongs to an Argentinian woman by the name of Violet Jessop, also known as Miss Unsinkable or the Queen of Sinking Ships. Let me explain why she is 100% the Miss Unsinkable. Violet Constance Jessop was born on October 2nd, 1887 near, I'm sure I'm not going to pronounce this right, Bahina. I'm just going to let the robot say it.
Bahia Blanca,
Argentina. She was the first of 9 kids by Irish immigrants William and Catherine Jessop. Out of their 9 children, 6 survived into adulthood, Violet being one of them. She's been unsinkable since she was a child. She knocked down my light. Okay. Anyway. Violet's been unsinkable since she was a child. She contracted tuberculosis and was not expected to survive, as with the case with most of those infected with tuberculosis or TB in the 18 and early 1900s. But she survived TB, and needless to say, this is the first brush with death that she will somehow survive. Truly, yeah. But that doesn't mean death didn't show up at her door at some point in her life. At 16, her father died from complications of a surgery that I couldn't find what exactly it was, but being in the 1900s, we can only guess what the surgery was. Oof. After the tragic death of her father, her mother decided to move the family to England, where her story really starts. She attended a convent school, which is a Christian school run under monastic vows of mainly nuns, and she also cared for her younger sister during this time. While Violet went to school and cared for her sister, her mother worked at sea as a stewardess. All of this is foreshadowing. When her mother fell ill, she left school and applied to be a stewardess, and she got a job in 1908 at the age of 21 on board the Orinoco. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that in half. Orinoco, whatever.
Orinoco.
A ship part of the Royal Mail Line, or at the time called the Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, or RMSPC. And this first voyage of hers went off without a hitch. Yay. Ugh. In 1911, at the age of 23, is when her seafaring life really took off. She totally scored a job working with White Star Line on the RMS Olympic. And if you don't know the story about the RMS Olympic, let me tell you. The RMS Olympic was a British luxury ship and the lead ship of White Star Line's trio of Olympic-class luxury liners. Construction of her began on December 16, 1908, and was completed and launched on October 20th, 1910. She had a 24-year-long career from 1911 to 1935. In those years, she served as a troop ship that carried soldiers around. That's what a troop ship is, Jada. In the First World War, which gained her the name Old Reliable. After the war, she went back to her original life as a passenger ocean liner. She was retired and sold for scrap on April 12, 1935, and was officially demoed in 1937. It was on the RMS Olympic that Violet survived her first sinking. When on board the Olympic on September 20th, 1911, she left from Southampton, England to begin her 5th westbound voyage and collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. The collision tore 2 large holes in the hull, resulting in flooding. But thankfully, there were no deaths and the Olympic was able to make it back to port without sinking. Violet continued to work on the Olympic until April 1912, when she was transferred to Olympic's sister ship, Titanic. Interestingly, she was completely content working on the Olympic and was not interested in taking a job on the Titanic. But she changed her mind when her friends told her it would be like really cool working on Olympic's younger sister ship, saying that it would be a quote, wonderful experience. Here we go. Violet officially boarded the RMS Titanic on April 10th, 1912. The first couple of days on board were uneventful, saying in her memoirs that she mainly enjoyed strolling along the deck before retiring for the night. Yet on the 4th day, oh God. Now, if you don't know about the Titanic, 1, how? 2, you'd actually be amazed how many people don't know about the Titanic. And 3, I want to talk about the Titanic because I love the Titanic. I'm a Titanic nerd. I have a shirt. This is my channel. We're going to talk about the freaking Titanic because I love the Titanic. Okay, here we go. The RMS Titanic is one of, if not the most famous ships in history. Also known as Unsinkable, the RMS Titanic was another White Star Line ship and was the second of 3 of the Olympic class ocean liners. And also at the time, she was the largest and fastest ship in the world. At 882 feet 9 inches long, 175 feet high, and 92 feet 6 inches wide, she was a behemoth at that time. Like, you know that scene in Titanic when she first launches and she goes by this little, like, fisherman's boat and she's huge? Like, that's a great depiction of how behemoth of a ship she was back then. Now, today, she is dwarfed by the cruise ships that we have today. But again, in 1912, she was massive. She's big. She's big. She a big girl. Construction began on March 31st, 1909 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and construction of her was completed on April 2nd, 1912. And side note, I've been to the Titanic Museum in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and it's really cool. Here's a picture of me loving my life in front of the big old Titanic sign. It was so much fun. Okay, anyway, Titanic was White Star Line's golden gem. If you've seen the box office monster and James Cameron's 1997 movie masterpiece, Titanic, you'll know 2 things about the ship. 1, the luxuriousness was off the charts. And 2, that ship sinks like a rock in a very dramatic, horrific, terrifying way. We all know the ship sinks. Sinks like a rock. Just before midnight at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, 1912, the lookout Frederick Fleet rang a bell and called to the bridge saying, "All together now, iceberg, right ahead!" It's fun. Even with that warning and a frantic call to the engine room, Titanic was just going too fast and struck the iceberg and began to take on water fast. Now, the crew didn't know it, but she was doomed to sink no matter what. No more than 4 watertight compartments could take on water and stay afloat. The iceberg had punctured 5 compartments. Anyone who knows the story knows that the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats on board. But did you know that in the early 1900s, all ships were seen as unsinkable anyways, and lifeboats were mainly for transferring passengers to rescue ships? So in a way, this couldn't have been avoided, but it could have been avoided. But again, we thought that drinking radioactive water was a good idea back then. We've come a long way in society. I'm just saying. And this circles us back to Violet. What's she doing on this fun adventure of hers? In her memoirs, when the collision happened, Violet was in her bunk sleeping when this big rattle shook her and her roommates. Unknowing she had only hours until Titanic sank, she described how she got onto a lifeboat. Quote, I was ordered up on deck. Calmly, passengers strolled about. I stood at the bulkhead with the other stewardesses, watching the women cling to their husbands before being put into the lifeboats with their children. Sometime after, a ship's officer ordered us into the lifeboat first to show some women it was safe. As the boat was being lowered, the officer called, "Here, Miss Jessop, look after this baby," and a bundle was dropped into my lap, end quote. Looking from lifeboat number 16, she saw the entire unbelievable moments of the sinking of the Titanic, including the infamous breaking in half of the Titanic. Lasting just 2 hours and 40 minutes, the Titanic disappeared under the Atlantic water at 2:20 a.m., becoming the largest and fastest sinking of a ship in the world. Out of 2,240 passengers and crew, only 706 survive, meaning 1,534 people froze to death in the North Atlantic Ocean. Among those survivors is Violet, sitting in a lifeboat, holding a baby, cold and waiting for rescue. Rescue that came 8 hours later that next morning in the form of the RMS Carpathia, who took the survivors on board and took them the rest of the way to New York City, arriving on April 18th, 1912. While on Carpathia, Violet remembers a woman grabbing the baby she was holding and just ran off without saying a word. She says, quote, "I was still clutching the baby against my hard cork life belt I was wearing when a woman leapt at me and grabbed the baby and rushed off with it. It appeared that she put it down on the deck of the Titanic while she went off to fetch something, and when she came back, the baby had gone. I was too frozen and numb to think it strange that this woman had not stopped to say thank you," end quote. Which I don't blame her for not really saying, "Hey, you're welcome," because if you had survived the freaking sinking of the freaking Titanic, you would kind of be in shock too, and just being like, "All right, okay, here, fine, go. I'm too cold and tired and traumatized to give a damn about a thank you." And unfortunately, she never saw that woman or baby again. So after that little adventure, you would think she would never step foot on a ship again. I mean, I sure as hell wouldn't. Nope, not gonna happen after that. No. But this is Violet, and she doesn't achieve the name Miss Unsinkable for surviving the merely sinking of the Titanic. I mean, surviving the sinking of the Titanic, I mean, that's nothing to, please. I mean, in my mind, anybody who survived the sinking of the Titanic is unsinkable, but I digress, please. 2 years after the sinking, World War I broke out, and Violet, being Violet, decided to join the British Red Cross just because she could, where she was assigned to the Britannic. Yep, I'm not joking here. And for those of you who don't know about the Britannic, let me tell you her little story. The HMHS, or His Majesty's Hospital Ship Britannic, was the final vessel of the White Star Line's Olympic class. She was deemed the safest of her sister ships. Oh, I'm sure she was after Titanic sank. She was intended, like her sister ships, to be a transatlantic passenger liner. But when World War I broke out, a very short time after she was launched, she was hastily fashioned to be a hospital ship in 1915, and at the time, she was the largest hospital ship in the world. And may I add, she was also, I'm sure, the fanciest hospital ship. I mean, look at this. I would break my leg to just go and get treated in style. Let me get my bleeding stopped in style. After successfully completing a few round trips in the Mediterranean Sea carrying thousands of wounded soldiers, she was ready for her 6th mission, which unfortunately would be the last of her missions, and this is the one Violet is on. Because of course she is. She's either the luckiest unlucky person or the unluckiest lucky person. In the morning of November 21st, 1916, Violet was helping a friend/roommate of hers who was under the weather get some breakfast. And she was taking her breakfast back to her friend's room when suddenly the ship shook fiercely. Britannic had struck a German mine and began to take on water fast. Violet knew something was wrong when she saw members of the crew running and leaping over tables trying to help. She dropped the food and went to check on her friend, but she wasn't there. Hoping her friend had already made it to a lifeboat, Violet grabbed some things she wished she had when the Titanic sank. She grabbed her Bible and a toothbrush. Makes sense. And hightailed it to a lifeboat. Whether it was from Violet taking too long or the crew member was just moving too fast, she couldn't get on a lifeboat. With these terrifying circumstances, people, including Violet, began to force their way onto lifeboats without any permission. Out of my way, I survived the Titanic. I get first dibs. I survived the Titanic, out of my way. It is at this point that I need to introduce you to a man named Charles Alfred Bartlett, or as his crew knew him, Iceberg Charlie, because he alleged he had the magical ability to detect icebergs miles away. So at least for me, it's no surprise that when White Star Line was looking for a captain of the Britannic, I'm sure one of the top credentials was, can you spot an iceberg? And steer it so that then the ship doesn't sink. And since Charlie, being named Iceberg Charlie, had that very ability, of course he was chosen to be captain of the Britannic. Duh. Being the captain, Charlie was thinking of how he could save the ship and his crew. Interestingly, about 10 minutes after the explosion, Britannic was in about the same condition that Titanic was in an hour after she hit the iceberg. After the SOS signal was sent, Charles saw the Greek island of Kea to his right. Thinking they could make it, he ordered for the ship to be directed there and gunned it, not entirely knowing that the steering gear was already lost in the explosion. Darn it. In the meantime, crew members and staff were trying to get off the ship as fast as they could. Charlie, having put the propellers to its maximum speed, the lifeboats, including the one Violet got on, began being sucked into the propellers. Oh my God. And these blades are huge. They're huge. And you're being sucked. No. Seeing some lifeboats and probably some people get obliterated in the propellers, and seeing her boat getting closer and closer to the propellers. Can you imagine that? Oh my God, no. Violet and others in her boat jumped out. I would too. Here's what's astounding. She explains in her memoir what happened in the water. Quote, I leaped into the water, but was sucked under the ship's keel, which struck my head. I escaped, but years later, I went to my doctor because of a lot of headaches. He discovered I had once sustained a fracture of the skull. She doesn't say it outright, but I think she was pulled under the propellers and one of the blades hit her head. She didn't feel, okay, look. I can only assume that a blade hit her in the head and she didn't die. Again, she's either the luckiest person or she's the luckiest unlucky person. Nearby boats and ships saved a total of 1,035 survivors, including Violet, somehow, again, hit in the head with one of the propeller blades. But unfortunately, 30 people died in the sinking of Britannic. Despite having gone through this, the accident of the Olympic, the sinking of the Britannic and Titanic, Violet didn't quit her job. In fact, she continued working for White Star Line for a few more years before going to another shipping line in 1920. Give you kudos, girly girl. Give you mad kudos. But you're insane. In 1923, at the age of 36, Violet married fellow White Star steward John James Lewis, but they divorced after a year in 1924. He wasn't gonna sink her. Retiring in Great Ashfield in Suffolk, England, after a 42-year career at sea, she received a phone call one stormy night from a woman who asked her if she had saved a baby on the night the Titanic sank. Violet said yes, and the woman said, quote, I was that baby, laughed, and hung up. Hold on. Later, her friend and biographer, John Maxtone Graham, said it must have been a prank call, as I'm sure you're thinking right now too. But Violet said, quote, no, John, I had never told that story to anyone before I told you now. Hold on. Titanic survival records indicate that the only baby on lifeboat 16, which was the boat Violet was on, was Ashid Thomas, who was handed to Edwina Trout, then later reunited with her mother on Carpathia. I'm gonna leave that there for you guys to figure out. Debate whether that was really the baby or not in the comments. Please do. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. On May 5th, 1971, the often winkingly called Miss Unsinkable died of congestive heart failure at the age of 83. In pop culture, Violet has been brought to the screen many different times. She made a mild appearance in the 1958 film A Night to Remember, and a scene in Titanic was inspired by her appearance in that film. In 2000, a TV movie called SOS Titanic, she was portrayed as an elderly stewardess. Her character was featured in the stage play Iceberg Right Ahead in 2012, written by Chris Burgess. And in 2020, she was a secondary character in the historical horror novel The Deep by Alma Castu. Okay, that was the story of Violet Jessop, truly Miss Unsinkable. She deserves that title 100%. I mean, if surviving the Titanic is simply a chapter in your life, and you keep going on ships that just keep sinking, and you survive it, and you get hit in the head by a freaking propeller and you live, you're unsinkable. If you learned something today, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. I will be back next week with another herstory video. And until then, don't be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, guys.